Hi, welcome to The Hobby, the weekly podcast focusing on games and war games. I'm your host, Dan Davis, and with me is
James Fisher.
And we're here today to talk about our favorite topics, war games, tabletop war games specifically. And what we want to get into today is Flames of War. Recently came out with Festung Europa, the first in the late war series of books covering the conflict in World War II in Europe. And just to give you an idea of how they break this down, Flames of War breaks down World War II into early, mid, and late war. Early being 1940 to 41, mid-war being 42 to 43, and late war 44 and 45. And the reason for this, as I understand it, is so that when people are playing, they have comparable army lists, so that you don't have the crazy super tanks of 1945 running around pouncing on the little guys from 1940. So, James, do you want to get into talking a little bit about Festung Europa and what they have to offer?
Absolutely. Festung Europa is the first offering from Battlefront for late war. This basically is an overview army covering January to August of 1944. This is what Warhammer players would know as a Ravening Hordes list, a get-you-by army list.
So this isn't intended to be the be-all, end-all of late war army lists?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
This is basically a blurry picture that later books are going to sharpen the focus in on for us. If you're familiar with Ostfront or Africa from mid-war, this book is not not supposed to cover every little army list that you could be playing with. Basically, just an overview to get you started.
Now, what's in this book? It's I know Soviets are there. That's the first thing I looked for.
Right. Of course, the Germans are there, as well as the Americans and the Commonwealth.
So a little 3-on-1 action.
Right. This isn't going to have some of your smaller lists, such as minor Axis powers.
Now, I guess they were prominent in mid-war, but I guess as late war hits us, Italians have been downgraded to sub-list.
That's right. Italians aren't really focused in this book as they're basically getting phased out of the war at this point.
As I was looking through the pages kind of covering the history in the beginning, I noticed that one of the first things they talk about is the occupation of Rome. So, yeah, that would lead one to believe that the Italians aren't such big players.
Right.
At least not compared to the role they had in mid and early war.
Right. Not to get into a history lesson, let's move on to the more interesting parts. What does this mean for my army? Being a German player, I'm greatly interested in what this is doing to my army. The first thing is the Germans remain veteran confident, as well as the paratroopers remaining veteran fearless. If you're a German player and you own multiple armies, probably one of the armies you own is a motorized Panzer Grenadier army. This is basically guys running around in trucks. To start off with, I'd like to talk about what my list, how it specifically is going to change for late war.
Okay.
Basically a 1,500 point list. Right. And I'm going to take this list and I'm going to show you that using the exact same troop types, what happens to them in late war for the same point totals.
Okay.
Starting off, every army's got to start off with an HQ. So our company HQ comes in at 55 points with Panzerknacker upgrades, as well as a 40-point anti-tank section. The two obligatory combat platoons are motorized Panzer Grenadier platoons at 225 points, once again with the Panzerknacker upgrade. Weapons platoons include the heavy platoon of 2 machine gun sections for 165 points and 3 PaK-40s in support for 265 points. We're going to finish this list off with 1 Tiger at 385 points and limited air support in the form of a Stuka for 135 points. This gives us 5 platoons for an exact 1,495 points.
Okay, well, as one of your frequent opponents, that army list sounds pretty brutal.
Well, let's see what we can do to make it even more brutal. In late war, for 1,500 points, you get the same HQ with the Panzerknackers for 55 points. Your anti-tank section, however, drops to 25 points. Not a big decrease, but it's going to start adding up, as you'll see. Your 2 combat platoons remain the motorized Panzer Grenadier platoons, now at 210 points with the Panzerknacker upgrades. Your weapons platoon of 4 machine guns drops down to 145 points. The supporting platoons is where this list really starts to get interesting. You still get 3 PaK-40s, but now you get them for a whoppingly low 170 points. Your Tiger gets a buddy. At 430 points, you now get 2 Tigers. Who doesn't want more Tigers? You also still get the You
I don't want to face more tigers.
Right. At limited air support, you still get the Stuka for 135 points. This leaves you 120 points light. With this 120 points, you can go wild. You can get reconnaissance elements of 3 different Kubelwagens, such as shown as this list, but the sky's the limit. You can get anti-aircraft platoons. You can get 2 more Pack 40s as another support choice. There's all kinds of crafty things you can do with this list.
Now, what kind of air support do you have in that list again?
Limited.
Now, why didn't you go ahead and bump that up to priority?
Well, that's one of the other changes for the Germans. At this point in the war, the Luftwaffe has taken a bad day. We no longer can get priority air. However, we do get sporadic air for those people who like to include just a little bit of air support.
Well, I kind of took a look at the army I play, the Soviets, similarly, but 2 very different armies that you can field, an infantry force and a tank force, just to kind of see if the rules changes, or the points cost, I guess, would affect each the same. And I gotta say they didn't really. Looking at an infantry platoon, or an infantry battalion, excuse me, for 1,500 points, you're basically going to get an HQ with a full complement of sappers and AA guns, 2 infantry companies with 2 platoons each, with all the upgrades like the Commissar and the light mortars, that sort of thing. You get a full HMG company, a full heavy mortar company, and for some tank defense you get 3 SU-122s. All that for exactly 1,500 points.
Sounds rough.
Yeah. As you transition into the late war list, you're going to spend 1,175 for all of that stuff. And now that sounds like infantry-based stuff got cheaper, but it really didn't, because looking at the HQ, for one thing, you can't get the extra 4 bases of sappers, so you're stuck with just 5 bases. Also, your AA has gone up, and you don't have access to some other things. As far as the Strokovi companies themselves, you can take the same rifle MG company or platoons. The Commissar upgrade is even more expensive. Instead of 5 points, it's 15 now. The HMG option is 25 rather than 20, and you don't have the ability to take the light mortar, so that cost isn't there. Also, you're paying roughly the same for your combat platoons, but you're getting 2 less bases per platoon. So with the size of a whole company, you're looking at 6 less bases. Coupled with the light mortars you can't take anymore, you're actually down 9 bases.
Well, it sounds like they really hosed the Soviets. I mean, now there's even less bases of conscript troops to kill.
Well, actually, that's not such a bad deal anymore. For those of us who are used to getting tagged on the infamous 2+, there's a little hope and sunshine, as we're now trained and confident. And while not being fearless is something to be afraid of, being trained is certainly going to feel a lot better than being a conscript when you're out there against all those veteran troops that you inevitably have to face.
Trats.
As you transition over into the tank battles, you'll see a much more drastic change in the points cost. 10 T-34s in mid-war would cost you 715. Now they're costing you 480. And similarly, but the opposite of the Germans, now we have access to priority air support. So we have that going for us. So there are some exciting things to look forward to.
Basically, all this means is more tanks.
Exactly, and who doesn't want that? One thing I do want to remind everybody of is to check out the Flames of War website, because there's some really good articles, one of which is the Festung Europa design notes. If you can get a chance to read that, they kind of go into the details and the thinking as far as how they augmented the points cost for different things as we transition into this late war period. And James, it seems like we have about 30 seconds, 45 seconds left on the program, so I kind of want to throw you a curveball here and ask you, what did you think of the new James Bond movie?
I thought it was okay. It might have been the second or third best Bond movie. I'm still not sure I'm sold on a blonde Bond, but he seemed to pull it off. I still think GoldenEye has to be my favorite, with a heart-filled pick to Octopussy.
So you think the third best Bond movie ever was just okay?
Right.
Okay.
It's hard for the Bond movies to compete with some of the newer movies, such as the Bourne movies.
That's a good point. I guess they have that built-in campiness that you just can't get away from.
Right.
Well, thanks for joining us this week, and we hope to get to talk to you next week. On episode 4 of The Hobby, we're going to get into the controversial topic of scale, in which we discuss how miniatures relate to each other on the battlefield and how they look as far as guns and helmets and equipment and that sort of thing. So thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening.
Somebody's hiding.